Today we're going to discuss and describe mysterious and invisible things. I am Joseph. This is Input English. For those of you joining us for the first time, this channel makes comprehensible input so that people can listen to stories and discussions. And because the words are spoken clearly and not too fast, there's a very good chance you will understand much of what I am saying. And as you understand the story or you understand the discussion, you will absorb the language through comprehensible input. I have many videos on how comprehensible input works. A lot of language learning channels deal with very concrete things. For instance, they might show you an apple. This is an apple. They might show you a knife, and they might show how to use the knife to cut up the apple. These are very specific physical items, and you can use them to good effect in language learning. You can talk about the size of the apple. You can talk about the color, the flavor, the texture. You can discuss the knife. Is it small, big, sharp, dull? So there's a lot to be done with these specific concrete items. However, the world has a lot of things that are very mysterious and hidden from our senses, and yet we still need to discuss them. Just because you can't detect it with one of our five senses doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Now, that has tripped up humans in the past because they assumed that their senses were all they needed to avoid danger, and then some of these invisible things harmed them. Specifically, what I would like to talk to you about today is radiation. Because radiation, we have heard about, we think about it in terms of nuclear power, some weapons. Radiation comes to us from space, from the sun. There are substances on Earth that are radioactive. The one that comes to mind for most of us is uranium, but we can't detect radiation with one of our five senses. So we can't see it, we can't hear it, we can't taste it, we can't feel it, and we cannot smell it. So those are our five senses. So we need other ways of detecting and describing radiation in our world because it's very much there. Now, people got into trouble with radiation because they couldn't detect it, and the harm happened without them knowing it. A famous example of that was Marie Curie. She could detect radiation, but it appears she did not understand fully its risks to her because she, during her work, absorbed a lot of radiation. People who worked in industry sometimes had industrial exposure to radiation. The classic example of that was the group of people who painted radium dials on watches and clocks. A radium dial was a feature of a clock or a watch so that it would glow in the dark. Unfortunately, the radium is a radioactive substance. Sometimes the people that painted those dials would dip the brush, moisten the brush with their tongue, and transfer radium to their body. That had some very unfortunate consequences later in life. Most of us assume that nothing in our house is radioactive. Nothing can harm us, and we go about our business dealing with the usual risks, the usual hazards. But there can be radioactive substances in our house. Now, don't misunderstand that I am fear-mongering and I'm not being sensational. No, we're going to put this in perspective, and basically there's no risk to you in this realm. but it is super interesting. Also, things have changed over the years. There was a lot more radiation in households 50 years ago than there is now. In households now in the United States, I can only think of two major sources of radiation that come with the house. One is radon gas coming up through the foundation. This is very well known, and there are ways of detecting that with a radon detector. And if radon gas is coming into a house, there are ventilation systems that can be applied to that house to exchange the air away so that the family living in the house does not receive high doses of radiation. This is well understood. Another source of radiation in a house that has been described is the granite countertops that were very popular in the past and are somewhat popular now. Some samples of granite give off radon gas. This is not a very great amount of gas, and for most people it's not a significant risk, but it is a known source of radiation in a house. There are a bunch of consumer products that are sources of radiation, and I'm going to review them. I've already explained that I can't detect radiation with my five senses, so I need a strategy for detecting radiation. There are a couple of options. Now, you probably have discerned by now that this is a language learning channel, not a product review channel. I have no affiliate links. I'm not selling you anything. I'm not doing unboxings, and I'm not promoting consumer products. I'm talking about language learning, and in this case, radiation. This is a radiation detector. It is rechargeable, battery operated. You turn it on, and it's ready to go, and it will detect radiation. This mostly detects gamma. Okay, so now I'm being specific. What kind of radiation exists? What kind of radiation would we worry about? What should we be concerned about? One of the types of radiation that you will not find in your household is X-ray. You don't have any devices that give off X-ray, but in a hospital, they have lots of machines that produce X-ray, and they're used for diagnostic purposes. X-rays are electromagnetic waves. They are not visible to us. We can't detect them except by a detecting device. So they will not be the subject of our discussion today here. I don't have an X-ray machine. There are two types of particles that we talk about in terms of radiation, alpha and beta. Alpha particles are described as basically a helium nucleus. An alpha particle consists of 2 protons and 2 neutrons, no electrons, and they have variable amount of energy depending upon what they came from, what their source is. Alpha particles don't go very far. When an alpha particle runs into something like air or a piece of paper, it's absorbed. It doesn't have penetrating power. Beta particles are energetic electrons. We've heard about electrons in school because they are involved in electricity. We've all experienced static electricity. We walk across a carpet or slide across a cloth surface and then touch a metal object and get a spark. Those are electrons jumping. But the electrons I'm talking about with beta particles are very energetic. They're going super fast. They have a lot more energy. So when they interact with, for instance, living tissue, they cause the development of free radicals. They cause an effect that can harm that living system. Beta particles have more penetrating power than do alpha particles. These particles represent the biggest risk to us if the source is a powder or very fine pieces and then we inhale it or ingest it. Another type of radiation that we will encounter is gamma. And gamma is electromagnetic radiation. Compared to X-rays, gamma rays have a very short wavelength. The frequency of gamma rays is super high. Okay, so that's a little background. Now, what about the household objects? I have 4 objects on the table, each of which is radioactive. And in your field of view, right there, that lamp is radioactive. We've talked about that in a previous video. So one of the ways, if you're screening for radioactive glass, is to assume that that glass may have uranium in it. And if you were to shine ultraviolet light on uranium-containing glass, it will glow green. So let's see if I can demonstrate that to you. This is a UV light. We call these black lights, ultraviolet lights, UV lights. They're all the same. Ultraviolet is the spectrum, and it gives off very little visible light. There is some visible light that comes with it, but the ultraviolet light is not what you see on my hand. That's the visible light that is a byproduct of producing the UV. So this is milk glass that contains uranium, and you can see when I shine the ultraviolet lamp on it, it glows green. You should be able to see that very well. So this contains uranium oxide when they made the glass. This is depression glass. A lot of this was made during the 1930s, during the Depression. It was inexpensive pressed glass made in the United States, and a lot of it had uranium in it. This glows green. This has uranium in it. Now, at this point, this begs the question, am I insane for having this here? Am I taking great risk to have this in my hands, in my house? Am I going to be harmed by this? And the answer is no. We all get radiation exposure every day, and we call that the background radiation. We get radiation from the sun, we get radiation from the solar system, we get radiation from sources outside the solar system, and that mixture of radiation coming to Earth from elsewhere we categorize as cosmic radiation. Cosmic rays are a mixture of many different things. Energetic protons, electrons, neutrinos, gamma, X-ray. A whole bunch of things are coming at us, and a lot of that is decreased or minimized by the presence of our atmosphere and our magnetic field. So Earth protects the inhabitants of Earth from radiation. We do know that if you spend a lot of time at very high altitude, you get more radiation exposure than you would if you were on terra firma. If you were down at sea level, that's how you minimize your radiation exposure. Again, I'm not trying to alarm you. I'm trying to use this as comprehensible input for sharing the English language with you. But we're not talking about apples and knives. We're talking about things that are invisible. So we talked about a screening method for glass that might contain uranium. What else can you use? Well, you can use this device. Not this one, this is the remote. This one, this radiation detector mostly detects gamma. It's not really set up to detect alpha and beta particles. So if you have something that emits gamma, this will go off. And it has an alarm set at a threshold so that if you turn it on and it's reading the background, it's not going to set off the alarm. Right now, the background reading here is 8, and the units don't matter, but it's a very small number. If I put this up next to this, it doesn't really change much because this doesn't give off much gamma. Also, this doesn't have much uranium in it. So this isn't very sensitive. Same thing with this. It didn't move a muscle. Nothing happened. As far as this machine is concerned, this lamp is not radioactive. What if we had a different device? Now, you may have seen this on the mantelpiece in a previous video. This is a Geiger counter. You might call it a Geiger-Müller counter. And the sensor that we have here has a cover. But with the cover off, here's the sensor, and this is called a pancake sensor. This was manufactured by the Ludlum Company, and these are available in the used market. If you get it from a reputable dealer, it's been calibrated and tested like this one so that you know the output is reliable. You can get these that have not been calibrated and tested, but how would you know if it's accurate or not? This one has been calibrated. So let's turn this on so you can hear the background. Every now and then the machine chirps. The needle has not moved at all, and it's on the most sensitive scale. So that's the background. So the needle has started to move, and it's above background, but it's not very much. So you can say this is radioactive, but minimally so. What about this? It's more radioactive. The needle has moved about twice as much, and you can hear the chirps are more frequent. This is more radioactive than was this piece of depression glass. Now, this is a camera lens. It's called a Takamar lens. That was a model or a brand name made by Pentax. This is made in Japan, although the Japanese were not the only ones to make radioactive lenses. Let's see if it's radioactive. It's screaming at me. So what I observe is that the back side of this lens is more radioactive than the front side of the lens. What about this? Just an alarm clock, right? This is a baby Big Ben made in the United States in the 50s, maybe a little earlier. It says made in USA. Baby Ben. Consumer product. It sat on your child's dresser. It sat on your dresser, perhaps. Wonder if it's radioactive. Get the picture? This is much more radioactive than anything else on the table. Okay, the same thing goes with my gamma detector. It gets over the threshold and the machine starts screaming at me. And then it goes back down to background. It's screaming at me, and then it goes back down to background. So the Geiger counter with the pancake sensor will pick up alpha, beta, and gamma. This little battery-powered gadget here, this little miniature gadget, is basically a gamma detector. We have demonstrated that the Geiger counter, the real Geiger counter, is more sensitive. It picks up lower levels of radiation. So this camera lens could be adapted onto the digital camera that I'm using to film this video. I've done it. These are beautiful lenses. They render beautiful images, and I bought this lens because it's an extraordinary way to render images. It's not dangerous for me to have this. Now, there are reasonable precautions. I'm not going to carry this in my pocket. I'm not going to put it in my bed with me at night. I'm not going to put it on a backpack and carry it close to me on a long safari. This thing needs distance from me because with just a little bit of distance, the detector doesn't even know it's there. Let's see how close I have to get before the detector will know it's there. A foot away, this reads twice background. And it doesn't set off the alarm until it's about 3 inches away. I don't worry about this. This is not a dangerous thing to have in the house. I never sit close to it. I am not carrying it on my person, and it's not a realistic risk. Let's say it were to fall off the mantelpiece and shatter into a million pieces, and I had to sweep up all that broken glass. Well, then I would put on a mask, maybe an N95 mask, because I don't want to inhale the little tiny pieces of glass that contains the radioactive isotope. I told you earlier this contains uranium. This contains radium. That's a different isotope. And we have a different one yet. This contains thorium. It was discovered back many decades ago that if you add thorium oxide to glass, it increases the index of refraction. And then the people making lenses from that glass that has the thorium oxide in it have some advantages of having that higher index of refraction. As time went on, people became more and more leery of having radioactive substances in their house or near them. And so the manufacturer of lenses abandoned the use of thoriated glass. But these are very much available on the used market, and I don't think they should be feared. This, on the other hand, represents a significant risk to anyone who tries to repair it. With everything encased in this, it's not a big risk. You stay away from it. You don't put it close to your body. Distance is your friend, and these are not dangerous to have in the house. But let's say I was a curious fellow and I enjoyed doing clock repair. Oh, I do. Let's say I set about the task of getting that baby Big Ben working again, and I took it apart to find out why it wouldn't run, maybe replace or adjust or lubricate so that it would work again. Don't do that. For most of us, it makes no sense to ever open up a radioactive clock and expose ourselves to that radium. So that's why this clock doesn't work. I have a lot of clocks that I've repaired and they didn't used to work and now they work. But I will never open this one up because it contains radium. The one other little detail for today that you may find interesting came out of the comments section. That lamp and this one have a pattern, and that one, from your vantage point, suggests that it's in the shape of a seahorse. That's a reasonable way to interpret that shape, but on closer inspection, it's not a seahorse. It's a sculpture, it's a pattern that recapitulates nature, and it's very specific. Engravers and decorators look to nature for shapes to decorate items, shapes to please the eye. And one of the shapes that has been used a lot in decoration and adornment is the shape of the acanthus leaf. Acanthus is a plant, and an acanthus leaf has a very characteristic leaf unfolding that is beautiful. This is the shape of acanthus foliage. A lot of curves, a lot of very pleasing curves, and other little features typical of the plant in nature. Over the years, acanthus designs have been stylized by designers, artists, engravers. When I studied metal engraving, I engraved patterns that recapitulated acanthus leaves. Now, when you have a pattern of an acanthus plant in an architectural feature, a decorative feature, a lamp, we call this a scroll. This is a decorative scroll. Now that may collide with your other understanding of the word scroll, that is a rolled up piece of paper. For instance, a scroll of papyrus, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Ancient texts were written on scrolls which were rolled up. Well, the nexus for the terms is that this is rolled up. That's where they are similar. This is rolled up. The papyrus was rolled up. But this doesn't refer to papyrus. This refers to a pattern taken from nature, brought into decor, architectural features, and engraving called the acanthus leaf. You'll see it on money. Acanthus leaves are seen every day on the money printed by the US federal government. So today we've discussed some things that are indeed important in our world, but they're invisible. Now, what if you were interested in theoretical physics and cosmology? Where would you go for good input that included that information? Well, there are two writers who write in English. They write very well, and they write popularizing books about physics and cosmology. I'll mention their names. Sean Carroll, spelled S-E-A-N, Carroll with 2 R's and 2 L's. He's an academic, but he has a gift for explaining things so that you and I can understand them. Brian Greene also writes great books, is a charming speaker and author, and both of these fellows have done a great service to us by taking the mysterious world of theoretical physics and cosmology into a language that we can actually think about and talk about. Both of these fellows are available to be viewed on YouTube. They have videos, so you can search for Brian Greene. You can search for Sean Carroll, and there's at least one video with the two of them talking together. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I encourage comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.